questions. So our next discussion looks at South Africa's tourism industry looking to leverage or for visa reforms. We had scheduled this interview with Maishome Chwete, spokesperson for the Department of Home Affairs. Can't find him now, so it's just us with Rob Tashima, managing editor of Africa at the Oxford Business Group. Rob, good evening. Welcome to the Talkshop.
Hi, Naledi. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you with us. So maybe a bit of background first on the Oxford Business Group and what it is that you do there as well.
Certainly. The Oxford Business Group is an emerging markets research and consultancy, and we look to provide on-the-ground field research on some of the most dynamic emerging markets around the world, and certainly South Africa we classify as one of those. I oversee all of the research activities and editorial content that we produce in Africa, which includes other countries as well, like Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, and so forth. And as a result, what we look to do is provide a snapshot of what's going on in these economies to potential foreign investors.
Okay, and so you then looked into tourism in South Africa and the visa reforms. I mean, what was it firstly that attracted you to focus on that area here in South Africa?
Well, South Africa's tourism sector is obviously a crucial one for the economy as a whole. I mean, you're looking at a sector that provides roughly 3% of GDP, probably about 4.5% of total employment to the economy. And if you factor in sort of the indirect impacts it has, the sort of knock-on effects on the rest of the economy, that rises to an even greater extent. So it's certainly a crucial sector for the economy, particularly when you're taking a look at things like jobs, foreign exchange, and so forth. So it's certainly, for any investor who's looking for potential opportunities in South Africa, it's one that regularly shows up as a good investment.
Yeah, I really hope that we'd have with us the spokesperson for the Department of Home Affairs to talk about some of the changes that we're seeing, some of the suggested changes that we're seeing to visa regulations and to the country. And this is just some of them, all right? Just to give you a broad background. This is for the listeners now. So in countries where there's no South African mission, the Department of Home Affairs will accept applications by post. That's visa applications by post, but this will apply for tourist and medical visitors only. Post applications will see biometrics of travelers. That's fingerprints and photos captured on arrival at ports of entry. That's for those countries. Biometric pilot site ports of entry are the various airports. That's something we don't really need to look at. But countries like China, India, Russia as well, certain measures will be put in place to ease the process of application, in particular for tourists. And then, of course, there was the issue that came up last year of children coming into the country. There was a need for original birth certificates and all sorts of documentation, unabridged birth certificates for children that are coming into the country. Some of those regulations the department is looking to ease those, they say, in the next 2 to 3 months. Rob, you looked at what that means for the tourism industry in South Africa.
Yeah, we did. The new visa regulations, I mean, they were rolled out, obviously, with very good intent in terms of addressing things like child trafficking and improving overall border security. But obviously that needs to be balanced as well with openness and accessibility, particularly for such a crucial sector and for South Africa's economies more broadly. So the fact that these new visa procedures that were rolled out in 2014 are now being relaxed or revisited with an eye to making them less burdensome for travelers is, I think, much needed, given the impact that we've seen over the past year and a half or so from some of these major markets. In China, for example, where potential visitors would have had to have gone in person to conduct these biometric processing procedures prior to actually going to South Africa, there were only 2 processing centers in Beijing and Shanghai. So if you are anywhere outside of those cities, it's obviously quite difficult and time-consuming and potentially expensive to go conduct those procedures. And even if you're in those cities, it can mean that you've got to take time off of work and so forth to go do that. And so as a result, what South Africa saw was a significant drop in foreign arrivals from China. And that sort of corresponded
23%, I believe.
From
drop,
about sort of mid 2014 to mid 2015, it dropped by about 23%, and it was mirrored by a sort of broader drop by about 6 or 7% overall in 2015. So being able, given that China in the years prior to that constituted one of South Africa's top 5 largest source markets, that's a pretty significant slowdown. So the fact that these procedures are being relaxed, that they're being revisited by the authorities, I think bodes quite well. We even saw a slight uptick at the end of last year in December with a tiny increase in terms of Chinese arrivals by about 2%. So these visa revisions should help strengthen that recovery.
Yeah, I'll take calls on this one. So what the Department of Home Affairs has decided to do is obviously loosen some of the restrictions imposed over the past 2 years to make it easier for foreign visitors to apply for visas, but also allowing Chinese tour companies to process visas on behalf of travelers and groups. So we understand that there's very small mission in China, so not a lot of places in Beijing, as you mentioned, Rob, where people can apply for visas. But are we not going too far when we allow Chinese tour companies to process visas on behalf of travelers and groups? I want to get your SMSs on this one. 34701. Send your SMSs. That's 34701. There's just also this perception that, we have these reforms and then a year later we're changing them. Then there's the underbridge certificates issue. 8 months later we're changing that as well. And there's a sense that the way we're going about legislating our borders, it looks like we're flip-flopping. I mean, does that not look bad to the international community, Rob?
Well, I certainly think that one of the most important things that any investor looks for in any country when it comes to potential investments is policy certainty and having a good sense of what the policy is going to be, having a good sense of whether that's going to remain the case. And having a good sense of if there are going to be changes, are they going to be A, well thought out, and B, inclusive of feedback from, the private sector and investors. In South Africa, I think there's been some really good examples of how that's happened. If you take a look at the energy sector, for example, and renewable energies, that's one area of the economy that's done quite well in terms of bringing in private sector feedback and having a good sense of collaboration. The same thing in the auto manufacturing sector. But, there are other sectors as well, mining and tourism, where it's a little bit more opaque in terms of the decision-making process. And certainly that does have an impact on the ability of investors to forecast the potential returns for their investments.
Yeah, I'll open up the lines as well, Rob, but stay on the line. I'll talk to you a little bit more when we come back from the news. So that'll be at around 8:05. It's 8:05. You're still on the Talkshop here on SAfm, South Africa's news and information leader. Still on the line with Rob Tashima, managing editor of Africa at the Oxford Business Group, talking about easing of visa regulations. I mean, that's been welcomed by South Africa's tourism industry, which is looking to boost lower arrival numbers tourists coming into the country. Rob, so let's just talk about what now that we're seeing these easing of regulations and restrictions into the country, if we were to throw forward and talk about the kind of perhaps growth that we're seeing of arrivals due to these changes now, can we make some of those assumptions?
Well, it's a little bit early to be able to tell just yet the impact of the relaxed visa regulations on the tourism industry as a whole, but certainly it's going to be beneficial. I think, looking forward over the next 12 months, the outlook for the sector is relatively mixed. You've got certainly a couple of silver linings with the new visa regulations, and obviously depreciation as well. While it's a challenge for a lot of the South African economy as a whole, it does make the country more attractive as a destination for foreign visitors. So you'll likely see an increase in arrivals from places like the U.S., Europe, as well as markets like China. But that doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect either. There's certainly going to be challenges. Domestic tourism makes up a large portion of tourism spending in South Africa. And so with the depreciation and inflation come along, decreased tourism, domestic tourism as well. So being able to manage that balance is going to be quite important for the sector. Overall, the long-term outlook, however, for the sector is is a good one. South Africa as a destination has quite a lot of attractive fundamentals, whether you're talking about the cultural attractions and good weather or business infrastructure. There's a lot of scope for increased activity in sectors like leisure tourism, ecotourism, business tourism. So being able to capitalize on those investors will certainly have the opportunity to see an increase in activity.
All right. Well, that's good news, Rob, and I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Naledi. It's been a pleasure. Rob Tashima is Managing Editor of Africa at the Oxford Business Group. You're still on the Talkshop on SAfm South Africa.